Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. The election of Donald Trump sent America into a state of shock. 2 years later, after the midterm elections, there's a quantifiable aftershock. The old status quo has been sent into a tailspin, and America has changed. Will this aftershock have a long-term impact on our culture and faith? Our next guest strongly believes we're feeling the impact of the Trump Aftershock, and he can prove it. Stephen Strang is an award-winning journalist and successful businessman who began his career as a newspaper reporter at the Orlando Sentinel. He later founded a Christian publishing house and media company while interviewing and writing about nearly every Christian leader in the country over the past 4 decades. He's the best-selling author of God and Donald Trump, which was brandished by the president during his appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in 2018. The CEO and founder of Charisma magazine, Stephen Strang, was voted by Time magazine as one of the most influential evangelicals in America. He's traveled to more than 50 countries, has interviewed 4 U.S. presidents, and has been featured on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, CBN, Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk, and The Daily Caller. Here to discuss his latest bestseller, Trump Aftershock, the president's seismic impact on culture and faith in America, is Stephen Strang. Steve, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
It's good to be with you. It's a pleasure to have you back as a second-time guest. We covered your amazing book, God and Donald Trump, and how it was really a wake-up call, an electrical shock that went through the evangelical world and surprised so many people that faith became a platform piece, religious freedom, and it kind of got those that were lulled into a false sense of security, false sense of really abandonment. When Obama was elected for a second term, it seemed like the country was heading in a path that was unstoppable, and Donald Trump shocked the world, and you covered that so eloquently in your bestseller, God and Donald Trump. You've now released Trump Aftershock, the president's seismic impact on culture and faith in America. And in writing this book, you kind of take us through a surge and a resurgence, and you break it down into each step of the way that's quantifiable and realistic. And I want to kind of get your thoughts of your methodology and how you compiled this between the 2 years from the election to present day, really releasing it on the day of the midterm elections and almost making a prediction that there was a path that was set, and it's a direction, and it's a new direction, and there is an aftershock, and that wave is almost as strong as the initial shock.
Wow, so much to cover. First of all, God and Donald Trump, I wrote it because I felt there was an untold story. The secular media does not get it. Now, Christians do get it. But I've been asked on CNN, MSNBC, some of those, why in the world could Christians who go to church believe that you should be married to the same woman till you die, trying to raise their kids according to the Bible, how could they support somebody as imperfect as Donald Trump? And I tell them, listen, I don't approve of those things that, they criticize about him in the past. I was a Ted Cruz guy myself, but I tell them this, and they don't know how to respond. I say, millions of Christians have felt that the country was going in the wrong direction. And you said during Obama, of course that's true, but I say it's been going in the wrong directions since the 1920s and the 1930s. It was kind of slowed down by World War II and picked back up in the 60s. I mean, we could talk about that if we needed to, but there have been trends. So millions of Christians were praying that God would do something. It's like one of the leaders I interviewed said, we were praying that God would raise up somebody. We didn't have anybody in mind. And so God, I believe, has raised up this very unlikely leader that nobody expected. And a lot of us initially didn't really like him. But I believe that he's changed. He has become a great champion of religious freedom. He listens to Christian counsel. He seems to like to be prayed for, and he's shaking things up. Nothing to stop this trend that's been going in the wrong direction, something had to be shaken up. So yes, he's accomplished all these things and we could talk about it, but he has also exposed or caused the other side to expose themselves. I mean, look how crazy they went with Kavanaugh. Who would have thought? I mean, here was a very qualified man. They looked and looked and looked and looked and they couldn't really find anything bad. And right before the vote, they throw a hand grenade. It had nothing to do with anything. It's been totally disproven. I think that they were trying to intimidate this man so much that he would just throw up his hands and say, I'm out of here. Withdraw my name, Mr. President, nominate somebody else. If he had done that, they would have been successful even without a vote. But Donald Trump is a disruptor, and many of the things that people don't like about him is because he's disrupting, like he's disrupting the deep state. But my book goes into all this. In Trump Aftershock, we grappled with how do we deal with this. There's some really bad aftershocks, like the left going crazy, what we call the Trump derangement syndrome, the deep state. I mean, we would have never known the names of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page had Hillary Clinton been elected. But I mean, how horrible that our top law enforcement agency is not only politicized, but weaponized against their political opponents. Donald Trump is changing this. At the same time, good things are happening in the area of diplomacy and trade and the economy. He's building up the military. And thank God he's standing up down at the wall, figuratively speaking, trying to keep this invasion. This is an invasion. It's just an invasion without guns. It's an invasion of civilians. And we feel sorry for these poor people. But America cannot take every poor person in the world into our country. I mean, there's probably 1 billion poor. However, I also know that the standard of living in the world has come up more in the last 20 years, and there are far, far fewer people in abject poverty. Some things are getting better, and that's one of them. But I'm glad that the president is trying to have firm borders, because it's part of having a country with law and order, and a country that kind of knows who it is and has some standards. The problem with the left, in my opinion, is they want to throw all the standards that go all the way back to our founding, our Judeo-Christian values. They want to throw them all out the window. Everything from celebrating Christmas and saying Merry Christmas, all the way through all these anything goes sexually, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just anything goes, and they're trying to throw it out. They're trying to remake America in their image. But Donald Trump is saying, let's make America great again. And he's not talking about going back to the 50s when you and I were children, when, we've kind of idealized those days. Those days were really not that good, which we could talk about if you want to. But I think he wants to go back all the way to our founders, to the Judeo-Christian values, the reasons this country was founded. And thank God he's standing up to the bullies, and he's at least giving us a reprieve.
Steve, you do a great job in the book of talking about the bully pulpit. You talk about America's division is more about style than content. And the style of Donald Trump is shattering the image of diplomacy. It's shattering the image of a hard negotiator. But it's kind of like you marry somebody and you know that they're like they are, and you marry them and you expect them to be different after you marry them, and then you're shocked 5 years in the marriage and they're still the same wild person or the same unfiltered language, or they're the same. America voted this man into office because of his brash, bold, almost irreverent statements about the obvious things that America has been hushed about. And it seems that the response, and you cover this, is that it is a style versus content. As you examined the extensive, miraculous accomplishments of the first 2 years of this administration, the religious rights breakthroughs, the moving the embassy to Jerusalem, his commitment to religious freedom, not only in America, but across the world. His style seems to be, people can't seem to get past the style to take an inventory of the great accomplishments of this man. And it is sending an aftershock, not only into America, but into the diplomatic circles of the State Department that says, well, in these negotiations, he goes into a private room with a leader, closes the door, doesn't have a recording, doesn't have witnesses, and he comes out and he makes a statement that we've been able to have a major breakthrough. And no other president has ever done this before. So are we looking at a style versus content distraction? And is this a tool of the enemy to continue to keep America divided?
Yes, to all the above. You know, when it comes to the Christians who are kind of never Trumpers, I interviewed a couple of them, including the editor of Christianity Today, who I respect and who told me he's not a never Trumper. He just doesn't like Trump. And what he explained to me was a lot of it was style. To him, a politician should nudge the status quo and nuance things. You know, in some cases that may be it, but we've had all kinds of presidents that have been politicians. The refreshing thing about Donald Trump is he's not a politician. And isn't it wonderful that he's exactly like what he was before when we elected him? I mean, all kinds of politicians, including ones that you and I would respect, like George W. Bush and his dad and others, campaign one way, and when they get in office, they govern another way. Even the great Ronald Reagan, who we all have up on a pedestal. He really, really wooed the evangelical vote, and when he got into office, he didn't turn his back on it, but he kind of stiff-armed them. You know, he let his staff do it. Donald Trump is exactly the opposite. In fact, he had a state dinner to honor evangelical leaders. Never happened before. He has evangelical leaders praying for him all the time in the Oval Office. I mean, as he can fit it in, he seems to enjoy it. You know, you mentioned religious freedom around the world. What about that American missionary, Andrew Brunson, who is in prison in Turkey? I mean, how many presidents have let how many Americans rot in some prison because they can't get them out? Donald Trump made an international incident over one Christian missionary. He put sanctions on Turkey that were so onerous that their stock market crashed or plummeted, I should say. Their currency plummeted, and they said, ouch, we went out of this. Here is your prisoner healthy. And he went, of course, to the White House, and they had a nice press conference. I'm sure everyone saw it. And then he asked the president if he could pray for him, and the president said yes. And he knelt down next to him, put his hand on him, and prayed a beautiful prayer. What president ever let anybody pray for them? I've had the honor of interviewing 4 presidents. 3 of them were in group settings with other evangelical journalists or leaders, and never was a prayer even prayed in those settings. And with Donald Trump, it's entirely different. I did get a chance to interview him one-on-one during the campaign. It's in the first book, God and Donald Trump. He actually called me, believe it or not, about Trump Aftershock. He had heard about it because I've been trying to get through to him for an interview. And he called me the day after Woodward's book came out called Rage. He was all upset about the book. And I guess he was really vetting me personally to see if I was friend or foe. And I told him, I said, Mr. President, no book documents your accomplishments more. In fact, we even have an appendix with all the things that he accomplished in the first 500 days. There's over 550 footnotes. It is very, very thoroughly researched. And the reason we did this is because it was important that the people who read Trump Aftershock sort of understand what's going on, because we get all these mixed messages from the media. We get a little from conservative media, Christian media, but then we also listen to all the other stuff and our friends and everything else. And how does all this fit together? I believe that this president is doing an outstanding job. Is he perfect? Of course not. No human is perfect. God has always used imperfect leaders. I mean, just look at the Bible. And one of the best examples is the king Cyrus, the pagan Persian king, that God very clearly said he raised up to let his children go back to Jerusalem. And for me, that was huge. I thought if God can use a pagan king like Cyrus, he can use a billionaire developer like Donald Trump. And I've actually gotten to where I enjoy Donald Trump's style. I do believe he's much more presidential, and I enjoy watching his rallies. You know, it's good entertainment. And some of the people who are constantly criticizing and bashing Donald Trump, and they do it every single day. And they always say, in fact, I bring this out in Trump Aftershock. They always say, well, this hasn't brought Trump down, but he has finally gone too far. Every single day they say that, and he survives that. Now, remember Stormy Daniels? Actually, she's in the news again. But when that thing came out, they finally said, now he's gone too far. All the evangelicals will turn their backs on him. But the evangelicals did not, because they understood, number one, he said it didn't happen. And I personally believe him. But even so, it happened a long time ago. It wasn't even like in the Oval Office with Bill Clinton or even John Kennedy, where the media turned they turned a blind eye to all this stuff that was going on. So it's just been very interesting to see Donald Trump and his reaction. But really with Christians, we're more interested in his policies than we are in him personally. It's his policies, the policies of putting conservative judges in the Supreme Court and all the federal judgeships is going to change this country, the culture of this country, more in the future generations than anything else that Donald Trump has done. The economy will go up and down. Diplomacy around the world will change in various ways at different times. But the direction of the Supreme Court, because the left has been using the courts to impose their will. You know, same-sex marriage was voted against in 31 states where they either had very strong laws or even constitutional amendments like we did down here in Florida. One person made that so-called the law of the land. Who is that person? Justice Kennedy. He was a swing vote. One person, and he was never elected to anything. And the left has used that. In fact, you know, just recently there's been these examples of where they go shopping for a liberal judge to try to oppose whatever Donald Trump has said about what's going on down at the border. And it has been a pattern for many years. Donald Trump is stopping that, and the left has its collective hair on fire. They don't know what to do. Even the famous George Soros gave an interview, and he said that something to the effect that anything that could go wrong has gone wrong. I mean, here he put $52 million in the last couple of years into all these leftist groups, many of which are responsible for a lot of this upheaval that you've been talking about. But it's also interesting, we document this in Trump Aftershock as well. We're careful in what we say because the research leads you to believe that this is probably the case. It's really, really hard to prove. But there are sort of left of center Christian organizations that get money like $200,000 or $300,000 from some of these groups that Soros has funded. But what'll happen is he'll fund one group, and then that group, you know, funds a bunch of others, so that the trail is a little hard to follow. But some of these little Christian groups, they'll get $200,000 or $300,000, which is peanuts in the big scheme of things. And you know, they will kind of voice all these sort of lefty platitudes. Some of the things they say I agree with, like we need to be concerned about the poor and so forth, but they all say it through the viewpoint of the Democrat should be in, the leftist agenda should be in, and I think it's very dangerous. And in a small way, we're trying to expose that in Trump Aftershock, just putting on the record what's really going on, because who else is going to cover it? The mainstream media is not interested in it. Most of the Christian media don't write those kinds of things, or if they do, they don't really care about it. So I believe that if people read Trump Aftershock, they'll learn a lot. Their eyes will really be open to a lot of things that are going on.
Steve, do you see Trump Aftershock being a commentary on Christianity in America and who are the real Bible-believing, you know, the word Christian, believer in Christ? Right? Now, follower and biblical Christian or Bible-believing Christian moves you more into the evangelical than just the pew warmer. Are we beginning to see a chasm between what is true biblical Christianity, what you and I practice, what you and I believe, the inerrant Word of God, and living that life, versus that quote-unquote self-identified Christian who is the one that voted these liberal Democratic House members into office. And if statistically 70 or 72% of Americans identify as Christians, then there had to be a large percentage of them who voted for those Democrats to go into office. Christianity in and of itself is antithetical to the liberal agenda. So,
you're right. The Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And I bring this out in Trump Aftershock, that this is not really Republican versus Democrat. It's not really right versus left. This is really a struggle between good and evil. And that's not to say that all Christians are good. They're not. We're all sinners saved by grace. But you're right. You're absolutely right that the lines are being drawn. You can't be in the gray middle much anymore now. You know, I live in the South, which has sort of a veneer of Christianity, but a lot of it is hypocrisy. You know, people go to the big church downtown and live like the devil the rest of the week. But more and more, you've got to almost pick which side are you on. In fact, historically, I'm interested in these kind of things, but even the term evangelical was coined because so many Christians weren't really Christians. So evangelical was coined for the people that, you know, really believe the Bible and go to church. And like, I've had fun on secular TV describing evangelicals. I'll even say they're Bible-believing, church-going, tithe-paying Christians. Of course, you know, the secular people's like tithe-paying, you know, I mean, they've heard of it, but they have no concept. But it's people that take their Christianity seriously. However, you know, we could talk about liberalism. There's a lot of liberalism in the church. There's more people sleeping together in the church than we want to admit. You know, back when I was a kid, in the church I went to, drinking was absolutely taboo. A lot of people are liberal on those kinds of things. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that were maybe raised in a Christian home. They're not really serving the Lord. They only go to church a few times a year. But it bothers them that their country is going down the toilet. It bothers them that their kids are being taught transgenderism in school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the people, the secular media calls them blue collar and in the Rust Belt and everything else, that have supported Trump. But a lot of them are people that their mom and dad and their grandparents went to church. They may, you know, not be that devout themselves. But, you know, it comes down to what is the direction of our country? What is the direction of our culture? And I believe that Donald Trump is trying to shift. But ultimately, it is not the president. One politician cannot do it. It's like one of the Christian leaders said, the kingdom of God is not going to come in on Air Force One. And I agree with that 100%. The church has got to rise up. And I believe that Donald Trump has actually emboldened the church because, you know, the left tries to intimidate us. If you don't agree with them, they call you some horrible word like a racist. Oh, we're not racist. We don't want to say anything that sounds racist. Oh, you're intolerant. No, we're not intolerant. We love Jesus. We love everybody. And Christians have become more and more intimidated until things got so bad. And you mentioned it earlier with Obama, it seemed to grow exponentially. And of course, we knew with Hillary Clinton, who I believe is one of the most corrupt people to ever run for office. In fact, it's in the news right now. You know, they're trying to get this poor guy Corsi over forgetting one email, and they're saying that he might go to jail the rest of his life. One email that he forgot about. Hillary Clinton destroyed 30,000 emails that had been subpoenaed by Congress. I mean, the way that things are happening in our country are almost ludicrous. But thankfully, we have a strong leader in Donald Trump, and he is a leader. We haven't always had leaders. We often have politicians that are kind of in it for themselves and in it to get elected again and so on and so forth. But we have a leader, and thankfully, he's making a huge difference, and I thank God for him every day.
Well, and I do too, and I say amen to that. We're talking with Stephen Strang, author of the newly released book, Trump Aftershock, the president's seismic impact on culture and faith in America. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the accomplishments, more about the cultural and the faith impact that Donald Trump is having on America and the world. We'll be right back. Shalom, I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I've got a question for you. What do you think they're doing with your DNA? Oh, you know that 23andMe kit that you sent off, and you got back that report that told you you were Irish, you were French, you were Jewish? Wonder who's interested in that information. It's not like you've sent it off to a database with millions of other people and they can steal your identity, and who would really be interested in that information other than you? Well, maybe your friends and family, but there's one, yes, one who is so interested in your DNA that it would be something that would make you afraid. And that is Satan himself. Why would Satan be interested in your DNA? Because there is a Y chromosome marker that determines whether or not you are in the line of Aaron. That's right, the biblical line of Aaron the priest. That's because if the priesthood comes back and the high priest takes his role as the head of the Sanhedrin, they will be the ones to call for the return of Jesus. Well, what can they do with your DNA? Well, there are 40-plus countries weaponizing DNA today. And imagine if Satan could weaponize your DNA and use that Y chromosome marker to take out the line of the high priest, then Jesus doesn't come back. That is the plot behind the best-selling book, The Codex, now out in second edition on Kindle, $2.99, also available in paperback. This is a biblical thriller beyond comparison that's going to take you on an incredible journey to understand what they could do with your DNA. I also want to encourage you to visit our website, ignitingnation.com, and click on special offers. There you're going to find the yellow cover of this book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. We're going to take you on a journey in the Garden of Eden to the seed, the ground, all the way out to the fruit that reveals things of the natural that God is trying to reveal supernatural truths. Contained within these pages are 7 laws and 7 lessons within each law. They're going to take you on an incredible journey of understanding about the life you live and the fruit you bear. I want to encourage you to click on that yellow cover. We're going to ask for your email. Now, we won't send you spam because spam is not kosher, but we will send you the first chapter of this book. I want to encourage you to get 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. You can get it at Books A Million, wherever great Christian books are sold. Take this journey with me to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden and to the Tree of Life we see again at the River of Life. Get your copy today. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Stephen Strang, author of the newly released book, Trump Aftershock, The President's Seismic Impact on Culture and Faith in America. Steve, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
Steve, I see the Oval Office grabbing a hold, holding the hands. We've had Dr. Jeffries on with us. We've had Barry Black on with us. We've had so many that have an impact on this evangelical circle, on the chaplain of the Senate, who are talking about more and more senators and senatorial staff are coming to Bible studies, that Washington itself, although it's been a cesspool of Sodom and Gomorrah on steroids, that there is a groundswell of faith initiatives and a renewal of faith even within the walls of Congress, even with the walls of the White House. But the leadership role that Donald Trump is taking and being outspoken about God and country, about faith and values, is not seen to being translated into the pulpits of America. And I think it's incumbent upon us to go back to the Founding Fathers, to that Black Robe Regiment, to where the American pastor is an influence in their community, and that they're not measuring their success on square footage or attendance or tithes or salvations, but they're measuring their impact on community change and on the environment of faith being protected. We haven't seen the persecution in America that they've seen in the Sudan, that they've seen in sub-Saharan Africa, as they've seen in Pakistan or in China. But that doesn't mean it's not coming here, and we're not seeing little uprisings here and there. And if the left gets a hold of all this, we will see Christian persecution in a monumental way. What is it that's holding back the evangelical church and the Protestant church itself from in the pulpit being the key voice, the influencer, the respected one, the one that commands the attention of the congregants, from taking a stand and speaking out about these faith matters?
You know, that's one of the most important questions as Christians we can ask. And, you know, I've been covering the Christian community since the Ford administration, and we've written about this in Charisma magazine many times, and I deal with it in Trump Aftershock. You know, there's a thing called the Johnson Amendment, and most people don't really know that. In fact, Donald Trump didn't know about it, but in 1954, then Senator Lyndon Johnson was angry because a couple of nonprofits in Texas had really opposed his reelection to Senate. And so what he did was he tacked on an amendment to a bill having to do with the IRS, and said that if nonprofits were involved in political activities, they could lose their nonprofit status. Now, since 1954, it's only been applied one time. So it's really been kind of a big bugaboo. But all the Christians who are, you know, nice, God-fearing people, oh, Mr. Government, you know, we don't want to upset you. It's much more complicated than what I'm saying. But there's an interesting story in that Donald Trump was meeting during the campaign with some Christian leaders. They had a great meeting, and at the end he asked them for their endorsement and support, and they said, they all looked at the floor, and he said, what's wrong? And they said, we can't. And he said, why not? And they told him about the Johnson Amendment. He didn't know because he doesn't live in the nonprofit world, and he said, that's wrong. That's stifling your free speech. And he has taken steps through executive orders to tell the IRS not to prosecute anyone. However, it really needs to be changed, and he's working with Congress to try to change the law, which I think is huge. But there's another very big thing that we've written about as well. That is that a lot of pastors hide behind it because they're not real leaders. A lot of them, if you get to know them, they're nice people, but they're timid. A lot of them get into pastorate because they have a teaching gift or maybe a counseling gift, or they just care about people. They're not leaders. They're not wanting to change the culture. And I think that we've got to have a paradigm shift and more leaders. Now, let me just mention one other thing. I've studied the Great Awakening. In fact, I have framed in my office a little magazine from that era and writing about the Great Awakening. It's very interesting to read the contemporary thing. And of course, even in the very first issue of Charisma magazine, we wrote about the Great Awakening. I remember that. And when you read about it, you say that the Great Awakening was necessary because of how compromised the pulpits were in America in that era. And I mean, it's hard for us to understand because we think of all those as kind of God-fearing people, and you know, they were mostly Christians. They were, you know, immigrants, most of them from England back then. And you think, you know, how could they be so compromised? But that's what Jonathan Edwards said. And it wasn't just the people in the pews, it was the preachers. And the preachers, there was a revival among preachers. And America, one of the reasons why America is more evangelical or more Bible-oriented or more church than Europe is that America has had wave after wave of revivals. We had the First Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening in the early 1800s, the Holiness Movement, the Pentecostal movement. And in your and my lifetime, you know, things in the 60s were very, very similar to how they are now with the radicals, the anti-Vietnam War craziness. And God sent two revivals in that period that nobody expected. One of them was the charismatic movement in the Catholic Church, which happened in 1967. Millions of Catholics, and I know a lot of people are Catholics in our circles are controversial, but the thing is that for millions of people, they received something from the Holy Spirit and their faith became alive. And then the other movement, the other revival was the Jesus movement, where all these hippies that were strung out on LSD and everything else, they started getting saved, carrying their great big Bibles, coming to church barefooted, getting baptized in the ocean. If you're from that area, you remember all those things. And I really think that the Jesus movement kind of squashed the whole hippie movement. Didn't it seem like our whole generation were going to be hippies? And of course, that's just, you know, kind of a memory right now. And I'm praying to God that another revival happens, and we're beginning to see the beginnings of it. But because the media doesn't cover it, in fact, a lot of the Christian media doesn't cover it, we don't always see it. And if we don't see it, we assume it's not there. But remember Elijah, he was so discouraged and he thought he was all alone. And he found out that there were 5,000 that had not bowed their knee to Baal. And I think that there's an awful lot of strong Christians, even in places like California, that we think is so weird, and it is weird. There are a lot of very strong Christians, very conservative people, a lot of great ministries. The problem is they're outnumbered about 2 to 1, you know, and when the other people have political control and control of the institutions and everything else, it's hard for Christianity to prosper. And so we've got to believe God for some kind of shift. The shifts have to take place in the minds and the hearts of men. And if people's hearts shift, then they will be more concerned about the unborn. They will be more concerned about biblical values. They will be more concerned about stopping some of this nonsense in our culture. But it's really got to come from the grassroots. It's got to come from individual people. It can't come from the top down. However, having said that, the Bible instructs us, commands us, in fact, to pray for those in authority. Why? So we can live godly and peaceful lives and raise our children and live our lives and worship in the nurture of the Lord. And thank God we have a Constitution that, even though it's abused with the courts and everything else, it holds a lot of this bad stuff back. And for me, the trend that really scares me is the fact that some people are wanting to have a new constitutional convention to rewrite the Constitution. And I think that we will lose our religious liberties if that happens. It's really very, very scary. Thankfully, that hasn't gotten a lot of attraction, but it is talked about. And if the left gets into power, who knows what might happen?
You know, one of the points you make in Trump Aftershock is this stay behind network of the Obama administration, the judicial appointees. It's really a government that's run by appointees, not by elected officials. And we tend to neglect, we look at this House of Representatives, 435, we look at 100 senators, and we look at the president and vice president, and that's all the elected officials there are that run our government. The rest of the people are appointees and employees, and there's a great wave, strong, entrenched, left behind group from the Obama era, and even the liberal era that we began to move into, even though we had a Republican president in office.
You're right. It doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. The deep state seems to kind of run things. And also people who are leftist or left-leaning, I'll say, because a lot of them are just center-left. They tend to gravitate toward government because they think big government is the solution. A lot of them are well-meaning people. You know, they want to help people with welfare or whatever. I know a lot. I grew up with these people. I went to university with a lot of these people. One of the reasons why Virginia and Maryland are so democratic is because all the bureaucrats from Washington that live there, most of them are leftists. Look at the FBI. At the FBI, they had all those emails, remember? And there were 50,000 emails, and there was not, as I recall, and I could be wrong, there was not one anti-Hillary email or one pro-Trump email. You'd think for all the emails going back and forth in the FBI that they'd at least have 10, 15, 20% conservatives. I mean, the country is pretty well split 50-50, but with the FBI, at least looking at it that way, and you know, they were saying, the top people were saying Hillary should win 100 million to 0. I mean, this shows their mindset. And it has to do with the deep state. I didn't even know the name of the deep state until like, what, 2 or 3 years ago. You know, people that talked about it, you know, they also saw flying saucers and all that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, that was at least the popular perception. But we're finding out that the deep state, and the example of the FBI is the main one, and also the CIA, but a lot of the other departments and so forth too. And you know, Donald Trump puts his people like Betsy DeVos in charge of the education department, but most of the teachers, most of the teacher unions, most of the people in that department are left. They fight her tooth and nail, and our schools are getting worse and worse, and it's just part of the whole thing that's going on in the culture. But Thank God we have a disruptor. Donald Trump is a disruptor. He gets it, at least in the big picture. He has very good instincts. The man is smart, smart, smart. He figures things out. Everybody else is playing checkers. He's playing chess, which means he knows these moves. And, you know, in checkers, you jump one at a time, right? In chess, the only ones that do that are the pawns. You know, he's using his king and his knight and his bishop and everything else. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand what he's doing, but he's got an agenda. He wants to get some things accomplished. It was very important to him. He's very competitive, so he wants to be remembered as a great president. And I believe that he already has proven to be a great president. And, you know, even people like George Bush, who I had interactions with when I was in my 30s and respect a lot, he didn't really accomplish that much. In fact, he kind of, you know, gave way to Clinton. And there are a lot of examples like that. George W. Bush didn't really accomplish that much except get us bogged down in these horrible wars. But Donald Trump is actually trying to change things, and things are beginning to change. And this is what I try to document in Trump Aftershock. And I hope that people will want to not just listen to our conversation, but that they'll want to pick up the book. It's 110,000 words. It's very well researched. And if you don't mind a shameless plug, it's available really wherever books are sold. This is not one you have to go get online because you can't find it in a bookstore.
Right.
I mean, almost every Walmart in America has this book, and I've enjoyed going into Walmart and seeing it, literally sitting next door to Bob Woodward's book, Rage. And I'm just thankful to God that he has opened these doors for me to where we can have a Christian book in these kinds of settings. And I hope that people will support us. Well, I hope they'll want to read the book. But if you're in Walmart, pick up a copy. Barnes & Noble, Costco, Sam's, they all got huge quantities. And of course, it's available in many other Christian bookstores as well as online.
Steve, when Jeff Sessions was appointed as Attorney General, I think there was a certain expectation that there was going to be some house cleaning, that the deep state was going to be exposed, and that a lot of these things were going to come to light and be resolved, and some people prosecuted, and some movement take place. We didn't see that happen during the 2-year tenure of Jeff Sessions. We now have this interim, which I do not think is the final appointment. Do you believe that in this next 2 years that there's going to be the real kind of shakeup in the Department of Justice? It's going to be necessary to unseat the tentacles that the deep state has in this clandestine campaign to unseat, impeach, to really discredit the person of Donald Trump and the person of his administration?
Well, I think that Jeff Sessions is actually kind of part of the deep state, or maybe the deep state thinking, even though he was elected. And you're right, he didn't accomplish much. And I think that after this Mueller investigation is terminated, and it will be terminated at some point, that Donald Trump will clean house. I think he's smart to let it play out. It would almost destabilize the country in a lot of ways if he were to just, you know, go in and fire him. Remember the Saturday Night Massacre with Nixon? You know, even one of the reasons why Gerald Ford pardoned Nixon was because he just felt that the country, you know, would be very, very destabilized, you know, by an impeachment and a conviction of a president. So I think that Trump is just smart. I don't think it's easy for him. You know, he has a pressure valve that he can let off with his Twitter account and everything else, but he's letting it play through. I think heads will roll. And, you know, if I could just say that prophetically, there have been a number of leaders who I respect. Now, you know, they don't have any access to the media other than maybe their own followers, who have said that things are going to be cleaned up. Even some people are going to go to jail. I mean, time will tell if that happens. We've tried to document that some. Some of it is so speculative, you know, that I've been cautious about saying too much. But I believe that things will be shaken up, and that some things will be, you know, for one thing, we can't have justice for, you know, I mentioned Jerome Corsi earlier. He forgot, you know, I can't remember emails I wrote yesterday I mean, if I were to be investigated by the FBI, I might, and they said, what were all the emails you wrote yesterday? Well, I'd remember some of them and wouldn't remember others. And they were asking him like 2 years ago, and he said it wrong. So, aha, we have you on perjury. You're going to prison. And then they let off Hillary Clinton. I mean, and not only did she delete the emails, they smashed the computer. They acid washed it or something like that. I mean, I always thought that if it was on a computer, somebody was going to be able to find it. But they made certain that they smashed them with hammers. There must have been some bad stuff on there because she's had a lot of criticism. But apparently whatever was on there would have been 100 times worse. And so she took the risk and did it. I hope that the president does clean it up because it needs to be cleaned up. We can't have justice for Hillary Clinton and justice for everyone else. And so your question is a very good one and a very timely one.
When we look at the midterm election results and we see that there was somewhat of a blue wave in the House, but there was a red wave in the Senate, and the Senate has certain powers that the House does not have. And that was a clear victory for the president when it comes to judicial nominations, when it comes to certain investigations and subpoena power, and the ability to do exactly what we're talking about, which is to dig in deeper. I was pleased to see the wins in the Senate. I was not surprised by the House shift. Not surprised by Nancy Pelosi, but this cry to impeach, this cry to discredit, this cry to annihilate the man of Donald Trump and undermine his presidency, at this point in time would have devastating impact on our defense budget, devastating impact on our economy, devastating impact on the foreign trade policies. It seems so self-destructive that it becomes a clear demonic influence, that there is this fear and this trepidation that if he stays in power, that they will never be able to recover the control that they once had.
And aren't we glad? And I agree with you, it's demonic. I mean, it's not really politically correct to talk about demonic, except maybe on Halloween or something, or if they're, a mass murderer who kills all these people, people will say it's demonic, and it is. But I think a lot of this is demonic. I think that it's the enemy. We Christians call Satan the enemy. It's good. It's the personification of evil, is stirring people up, and this goes on all the time. But in many ways, including sin in people's own lives and everything else. But what we're talking about here is the culture and the direction of the country and what's happening. Now, I disagree with you that it was a blue wave. It was maybe a blue trickle. If Donald Trump hadn't campaigned as hard as he did, I think they would have gotten like maybe 40 seats, which I think is the number, if I remember correctly, that Obama lost. Actually, it was, I would need to recount it, but I think it was about 7 seats majority. If 4 had shifted, the Republicans would have held control. And those 4, if you drill down, they were really rhinos. I mean, there was a lady in Utah that lost, and she's a Republican, but she was kind of anti-Trump. And Trump even kind of tweeted out, kind of like, serves you right. You would have won if you'd supported me. And I think that was a good point. And I think that there were at least several others as well that could be put in that same category. But you know what? Our country has very often had, over the years, has had, the one party has the Senate, the other has the House. They both have both houses of Congress, and the other party has the White House. This is kind of the give and take of politics. Now, true, Trump could get his agenda through easier if he had a majority because the Democrats could all vote in unison. But, isn't it interesting what happened with Kavanaugh? Every single Democrat who was in a state that Trump had won by a significant margin, every single one lost. And Now, there's some Democrats, of course, that won, but what's happening is that people are beginning to see what really goes on. They're seeing that Trump, those were huge victories, huge victories. If the Republicans had lost the Senate, it would have been almost impossible to get anything done at all. So, it could have been a whole lot worse. It could have been a whole lot better. But Donald Trump is still president. I think some good things are going to happen. Some good things have already happened. In fact, the book, Trump Aftershock, does not deal with the midterms because we knew the book was going to come out at the midterms. And of course, as the readers were buying them in the stores and so forth, it'd be old news. But my feeling was, even if the other side had gotten both houses of Congress and not much was accomplished the other 2 years, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch would still be on the Supreme Court. The embassy would still be in Jerusalem. Taxes would still be cut. Regulations, which we've not talked about. I own a small business, and while the regulations for publishing and media are not the same as like for the oil industry and the medical industry and the insurance industry and everything else, they're onerous. It's all this paperwork. It's all this nonsense. And Trump has done away with a lot of that stuff, and I think will do away with a lot more. So these aftershocks are going to continue and be valid. If Donald Trump, God forbid, died in office tomorrow, I think he would still be remembered as a great president because of what he accomplished in his first 2 years. And then, and I hope Donald Trump lives to be 100. But, even if he was out of office, Mike Pence would be president. And I would be pretty happy with Mike Pence, and I hope that he wins in 2024.
Well, the book is called Trump Aftershock, The President's Seismic Impact on Culture and Faith in America by Stephen Strang. His last chapter is stunning in the continuation of what's going to happen with the shaking of the church and a seismic shakeup that's going to come after more aftershocks. And I think we are need to prepare ourselves for 2 more years of seeing the impact of the election of Donald Trump have a seismic impact on our culture and our faith. Steve Strang, thank you for an incredibly well-researched, well-documented, factual representation of the Trump Aftershock. And I look forward to having you back on with the next book, which is going to talk about this cultural reawakening and how America is going to wake up and return like they did with the Azusa Street revival, which happened in California. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, and God bless you for what you do.
Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.